together, and we're right at 5 o'clock. Roll call, Tony?
Present.
Chris?
Here.
Warren?
Present.
Attorney Schober? Ben? Myself, Jeff, Tom?
Here.
Tom? And our guest, and of course Kevin also. Okay, no public hearing. I don't think we're just gonna, no action on this minutes because we want to get right into the meat of what we're gonna do tonight, okay? We'll do that in our next meeting.
Okay.
So, any public comments at all? No public comments? Going twice, no public comments? Okay, we're gonna move on. Well, we're going to also have no action on the portable on-demand storage. And we will move right into, and we're not gonna do a closed session, we'll move right into the American States Equipment Company. And we'll just review that and talk about that, okay? You wanna run with it?
Sure. So you have before you, there's 3 items as part of the request here. For the applicant has supplied us with a rezoning application. They've also supplied us with a conditional use grant request and also a certified survey map request. The first item we're going to talk about tonight is going to be the rezoning. The rezoning is sought as a companion to the conditional use grant request to be able to operate a business. For the applicants, they're desiring to run a, what are we calling this?
Equipment sales rental
Yes.
establishment.
Thank you very much. So in order to do that, they needed to rezone from a B3 to a B4. We talked about this at last month. We tabled it to tonight's meeting with the understanding of an opportunity to correspond with the applicant a little more on the conditional use grant to see if we can kind of talk about some of the conditions that were up for conversation for tonight for the Plan Commission to consider. So as part of that conversation, the city attorney and myself have corresponded with the applicants, and the applicants have responded in kind with some of their desired inclusions in that. And so as part of the rezoning request, I mean, we can do one of 2 things. We could table the rezoning for now and bring it back up after we go over the conditional use grant request. I don't know, attorney, what are your thoughts on that?
That would be my suggestion.
Okay. So if somebody would want to move that we push this to discussion after the conditional use grant and pick it up again, I think that would be
I'll make a
proper.
motion to table the first part until after the CUG.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So with that being said, we're moving on to the conditional use grant request, and that's kind of the crux of why we're here tonight too, I believe, that we had, again, discussions with the applicant. They've responded in kind with some of their potential inclusions. You have a copy in front of you of what they feel is representative of what they would like to see. Now the attorney and I have looked at it and we talked today about it somewhat. And with that being said, Attorney Schober, did you want to kind of walk through this, or what are your thoughts on how you want to address this?
I'm not sure. Jeff and I talked about this a little bit before the meeting. We want to keep this moving along. It's been identified as being a good project, but the Plan Commission and the board have to know what they're getting. They have to well understand what this is going to look like, what it's going to consist of, and how it's going to operate. So we're trying to tie those things down to intelligently end up with a CUP that works. I think I earlier indicated that last 2 CUPs that I've been involved in didn't turn out the way that I think we anticipated. And I'm trying to be cautious this time to make certain that you understand just what we're getting as you make the decisions. Ben and I will not make those decisions as to whether or not it goes forward. It's going to be up to you but we can try our darndest to get a full understanding of what this guy is going to look like and how it's going to operate. So the documents that should be essential to you, and I know the time has been short, and maybe some of you are seeing it for the first time, but we'll try to keep moving. There's a colored version of reds and blues of the draft was run by the top lawyer, who's here, Mr. Jonas, from 4:55 p.m. on Tuesday. So we just got it recently, but we need this, I think, and we constantly talk about it because it allows us to focus on the specific provisions that are relevant. So that's one thing. And then the other is, I asked the applicant's attorney, who was kind enough to do it, to provide an explanation, a rationale for what they were asking, so that you have a chance to know about that and to think about it before we move forward, or as part of the process of reviewing it. So that would be an email that says Jonas Paul R. on Tuesday, September 5th at 4:55 p.m. I guess it was contemporaneous with the draft of the CUP. So those are the two documents that I think, if we're ready to go forward and talk about it now, are the ones that you have to have in front of you. Does everybody have that? Say yes, please. Okay. So, I guess if I'm going to lead the discussion, just make sure everybody's got everything. It's that one, yes, but it looks more like just with highlights of
The blues and
differentiating.
Hold us a second.
That one should be, this one finalized without the marks. So
Okay.
this one's better to show you
So I'll take
the
mine.
Okay.
Thank you, dear.
Okay, everybody have it?
So, now, it seems like a small thing, but I don't know if it is so small. The heading on it, it's a conditional use grant, and it talks about equipment sales and rental establishment. The two things that are part of this operation that seem to be significant to me are that it's a headquarters, that it's going to be somebody's headquarters, and you have to decide how important you think these things are. Where do they fall in your list of priorities? So it's going to be a headquarters, and I think it's also going to be, as I understand it, a repair facility, that there will be equipment repaired there. So my thought for both the protection of the applicant and for the village is that it should identify for somebody who's looking at this thing 10 years from now, what were those guys thinking about back in 2023 when they put this thing together? So my suggestion would be to put the various uses that are all four of them: headquarters, equipment sales, rental, establishment, and farm equipment repair. I don't know if I want to go through each one of these at a time, or whether you want to keep going and come back to others that may be interrelated to preceding issues. You tell me. I did tell my wife I expect to be home at midnight tonight. No, don't shake your head.
Sorry.
And I'm not saying that please to discourage discussion. I'm really saying that to encourage an in-depth review of this document.
Okay, just repeat that for everybody, Mike. Repair,
Well,
sales,
yeah, well,
rental.
it's a headquarters, and I've only been in so many presentations, but there's a lovely building that's been built that would persist even if the applicant leaves, which we'll talk about later. But, so it's a headquarters, and then I understand it's repair, and repairs are a pretty big part of the operation, because there's a request later, as we see in the document, to increase the amount of area for storage that would include perhaps some new equipment, but also includes the equipment that has to be repaired.
Can I clarify that, Mike? for you?
I think that it was, I'm answering for Jeff, but we talked about this, and I think the answer is yes, that we would ask for the applicant's participation in the discussion.
So the storage yard is a mix, excuse me, a mixture of different equipment. So it's new inventory for sale, it's rental inventory, which is separate from our new whole goods that are for sale. And then it's also machines that customers bring to us for repairs. That's a very small part of it. The majority of the equipment kept in the storage area belongs to us, whether it's new inventory or rental machines. And then the balance, we have some machines for customers that are brought in for repairs as well.
See, I appreciate that comment, because that allows us to better understand what's happening, and then it becomes a matter of us reducing that in unequivocally understood words, not only for the people sitting here, but the people 5 years or 15 years from now. So that's the whole goal of getting to the point where these decision makers or recommenders understand what they're getting into, and that we accurately in words depict that for people who may not be here now.
Sure. You refer to people that may be here in 10 years or 15 years from now, and so that's what raised our concerns on the language as far as corporate headquarters. Is it a corporate headquarters when we build it? Yes, absolutely. But one, there's not really a legal definition of a corporate headquarters. But on top of that, I can't tell you in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we've been at our current location for 61 years. I can't tell you in the future, as our company continues to grow, the need for additional office space, if we have to centralize accounting, centralize HR, all of our administrative staff, executive staff, and we can't accommodate it in that facility, we would then probably have to explore the idea of going to a separate office building somewhere else for our quote unquote corporate headquarters. It would by no means change the operations of this facility. You would still have office staff, administrative staff, sales, service, repairs. The building, the operations would continue just as they would at the initial onset. But my concern, just like you said, is what happens 10, 15, 20 years from now if someone were to look at that and say, but that's not your corporate headquarters anymore, you move that to an office building someplace else. They could, in fact, then make the argument that we're in violation of that permit and close that operation down. So asking me to, I'm considering a multi-million-dollar investment in this community. And to do that with language that could potentially shut my operation down in the future based on somebody's interpretation of corporate headquarters, I think is not reasonable.
No, I'm not going to disagree necessarily fully with what you said, but could we take that up when we get to that point in the document? I'm just trying to take it one step at a time.
Okay, I apologize. You had mentioned corporate headquarters, so I thought you wanted to
I'm
discuss
just
that.
talking to the extent of the characterization of what general is going to be there at this point in time.
So maybe I can elaborate a little bit more just on the operations themselves.
If you don't mind, Jim, can we take it in the order that it's presented so that the people who maybe are not so close to it have a chance to understand it in the sequence in which it's written?
Sure.
Thanks. So anyway, then our comments could be considered. I don't know if anybody else has any comment on that. I'm not asking for support. I'm not asking for people to disagree with whatever your feelings are. And
Well,
some-
if you have, you want to talk about that now a little bit, I do have some thoughts that, I think a big part of this is to have that nice headquarters type building there. Now, if you list it to me as a headquarters, that could mean corporate headquarters, it could be whatever type of headquarters that is there or something like that, without saying it's corporate headquarters. And I think that's a big part of putting that facility there. I don't want to see just a basic garage type repair center there.
Yeah. And that's not our intent.
I know that, but I think that's why we need some of that language in there. So, go ahead.
And then the applicant does address that. And if you look further down the page, 3 quarters of the way down, in the now therefore paragraph at the end of it, the applicant proposed language provides the applicant shall not be obligated to maintain such corporate headquarters or premises for any period of time following the opening of the business on the premises. So if the fact that it's going to be a headquarters, but no guarantee it's going to remain that way, is satisfactory to you, that's the way it will move forward. I guess I will say that. The building remains as designed and as represented, so whether it's used as a headquarters or not, it still gets the same exterior appearance. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I mean, I would just like to chime in a little bit here. And one thing that just came to mind too is purely from a zoning administration standpoint, when we talk about parking, land use, I mean, we try to call the land uses out on the property. One of the uses we would call corporate headquarters or whatever is office space. Because office space then would mean that should they vacate someday or they decide to sublease their building someday, it's still office space in the end. And so then the parking standards would still apply, things of that nature. And it seems like if instead of saying corporate headquarters, as mentioned throughout the document, maybe we just refer to it as office space, because then it's a little more calculated in terms of parking space calculations, land use, and it's clear in the document that this applicant is applying for office space, not necessarily corporate headquarters, as part of, it is for the office space, and that it could change, the dynamic of the use could change over time to say, well, the CEO now has a different location that's not here, and it's not the corporate headquarters anymore, but it's still somebody sitting in the office space, or it's available. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, that makes sense to me, and I think that this discussion is really intended to provide.
Could you just call it administrative operations?
So,
But
but it's already in here.
in that paragraph.
It's already in here, it's under the now therefore it is granted. It says for the purpose of equipment sales / rental establishment supporting office, service, and repair functions, which purpose shall also initially include the establishment of a corporate headquarters. So wouldn't that cover it?
And that's the question for you. I think.
But you were saying like, you wanted to put it up here under the conditional use grant of equipment sales, rental establishment, and corporate headquarters, right? At the very, very top.
Yes, all I'm saying is that the top should reflect what we're approving. And you decide what you're approving, what your section that has to say for those who follow. If it's a consensus that the headquarters is not a significant part of the motivation, that you understand that could be transient, then don't you do it? I'm just saying, and if you want to add the repairs up above, to me, I think that helps the applicant, because that is a significant part of the operation, as I understand it.
I understand.
Although the text of it still says what you said.
I mean, how,
I hate to get hung up with something that's.
Right, I don't know how muddy you want
Here
to
we
make
are.
that. I think it explains what it is, and if someone wants more detail to it, they can read further into it. I think what the applicant is applying for, in brief, is it's stated right there, equipment sales and rental establishment. If people wanted more detail, they would read more into it, and if it calls it out, like Tony said, it's exactly what he's seeking.
I mean, I look at it, there's other businesses in Big Bend that this is their only location, they are a corporation. We don't require them to state corporate headquarters on their, plan of operations. I don't see that exact wording needing to be in the heading here. Just to the point that's been made that, they could be growing to a point where this facility is not big enough to handle their operations. So their office staff may be relocated, but the facility will still stay operational. I don't think tying the corporate headquarters into there, to me, is that important. We don't ask, Crossroads Pizza to put corporate headquarters on their plan of operations, even though that's their main location.
Oh, that's fine. I didn't see all the presentations. The one that I saw, it seemed to be that the corporate headquarters for this large company was something that was important. And it may not be. But that's for you to decide. I appreciate what you're saying. And I don't know if it's really necessary to talk about much more. I think we understand, believe the heading the way it is. Understood?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to come to conclusions on what the wording's going to be to the extent we possibly can.
Okay, let's go ahead, Mike.
So, page 1 then, I think we're set.
Typo,
I'm sorry, unless somebody else has something, please.
there's a typo.
Oh, okay.
Out of the original part, the word north is misspelled. The second line, start at the second line,
Is it, which one is it?
start at the second line right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
oh, legal description, that's the Viking version of north.
Yeah.
Thank you. You followed that description all the way around, make sure.
I tried, yeah.
Where'd you run it?
I didn't see it anywhere else.
Thank you, sir.
No.
No.
So if page one makes sense to everybody, so far, let's go page two. Page two, number two, there's language that deals with the grant of the CU being conditioned on doing certain things in a certain time period. And I just observed here that there's two things that could trigger that. They start at the end of the first line. The approval of the use is commenced, or the building permit is obtained within 12 months. I guess they both sort of make sense, and I don't want to make them all out of the molehill, but there sometimes are situations where it's difficult to tell whether a particular use commenced. Does it start with grading, or does it start with building a building, or something such as that? The grant of the building permit is objective. That's a very objective thing. So, I guess between the applicant and the board, is it acceptable the way it is?
The commission.
Or, I'm sorry, commission, thank you. Is it acceptable that one be a bit subjective? We want to go back to our lives experiences, and I was involved in a situation in Berlin, but on the other side of the city, and it became a big battle as to when a use for a church began, when it was commenced, and it got to be, well, it followed a federal court decision. But I don't know, maybe Tim could try to input at this point. Can we go with just the building permit as being an objective thing versus when the use is commenced?
Well, I guess, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, in my opinion, the use, the building, excuse me, the building permit is gonna come before the use commences, because the use, as it's defined in the zoning ordinance, is the equipment sales and rental establishment. So the operations don't start until the building's constructed. The building doesn't get constructed until a building permit's issued.
So are you saying
So
that?
I think it's, I mean, I think it's really a moot point. I think it's either way, but.
Take the wording out then?
I mean, I don't see the
I mean,
need
I agree with what
to.
you're saying, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't see the need to. I don't see it being an issue, to be quite honest.
So I'm trying to get to the language at this point. And you.
No, I understand. I just don't see how that language is really an issue.
But so it shouldn't be in there, is what we're saying.
Or would you prefer to say
I
building
prefer-
I
permit?
guess, would you prefer the language to remain as is?
I prefer to remain as is.
There's a
I mean, I think there's very,
building permit because of materials and stuff like that.
yeah. I think there's little likelihood that the use commences before the building permit, but I think that language protects everybody involved, the village and us.
Can I ask, just for context, is this who wrote the CUG?
Well, I think it started with us, and then we asked for more detail from the applicant. The version that's before you is the applicant's last version that they provided to us, which slightly updated one from last Friday, I think, so I was leaving for the weekend. So this is, the substance of this comes from the staff, as starters, of a lot of the detail, including the current items, are new items. For the most part, they are clarifications, some might say, and they are changes, as others might say.
So I would assume that this was taken from, that it wasn't built from scratch, it was probably used out in the form that existed, that is commonly used.
Yes, yeah, this is a form I lifted from a previous, you're right, site plan,
So
plan of
then what-
operations, and I kind of massaged the language to meet our needs, and then Attorney Schulberg looked at it.
So as we sit here tonight, offering up semantical approaches on some of these words and wording, and just the text of the whole thing, is this common? The approved use is commenced or the building permit is obtained within 12 months. Is that a common term? Would that have been from your copy and paste form that you used? And the reason I ask is, I don't see why we're debating it.
I don't know that I can answer that, Tony. It came from earlier drafts, I believe, Ben did the earlier draft. So I'm assuming this is the same as,
As I think this is, I've seen this language in other CUGs before. I don't know that it's a contentious thing to even have to try to address.
no, I agree with you. is it acceptable to the commission members at this point to simply have it based on, well, it's based on two, it becomes void based on two events. One of which is when the use is commenced, and the other which is the building permit is granted. It sounds to me like the building permit is the only one that's really makes sense, but you decide, does it make sense or not? Do you want to have the two criteria? I mean, it doesn't really justify a great deal of additional discussion. I think it came out of earlier, I didn't draft it, but it came out of earlier versions.
I
So, I mean, leave it as it is.
No, I
I think
think,
that's a suggestion, leave it as it is, and if that's
We
not
have-
it's not objectionable to the applicant, so leave it the way it is.
yeah, we have to, you know, pay attention to what Mike's trying to tell us, because he's really trying to protect us in the village here. And I guess it comes down to, what do we want as a planning commission? If it's good to stay in there, let's move forward. If somebody has an idea that they want to change it, we can do it. So it all
Do
comes.
we have a, I guess, as like Tony was asking, as like just a cookie cutter template CUG form that we go off of? I mean, that's something I would think that we would give to the developer, and whatever he could test, he would make the changes, and then that would come in from us, and we would, whether we agree with those changes or not. But it seems like we're getting more of his recommendations instead of the developer's changes.
No.
That's what I'm leaning towards.
No, this is the developer's draft.
Okay.
This is the developer's draft. This is at the point that you just described, where they've given us back our thoughts. And it's a question for the commission members, what do they agree with? So the first two things that we're talking about here are really not the guts of this thing. I think it goes beyond that.
I would assume it's the stuff that's mostly in the either red or blue that we need to really discuss. I guess you asked, I'm just trying to chase this down, of, you know, how far we're looking at this and how deep we're currently going with it. So let me ask a question. Did you change that language, Tim?
In two?
Yeah, for the approved use is commenced or building permit is obtained within 12 months. Okay, so that was our standard language that we gave to them. So why is it even being debated? Because we're debating our own language that we put into it.
I think, yeah, we're spending way too much time on this.
Right, we're
I agree with that.
Do you
I
like it?
just want to bring it to your attention. There's two standards. Is it okay with you?
Yes.
And it sounds like it's okay.
Yeah, let's move forward,
Thank you.
yeah, it's okay, leave it. Okay.
But to continue down on that page, the indemnification provision, that is a provision that comes out of the ones that I've seen in the past for the village. Essentially, it would be a risk shifting provision. It essentially says that if there's some harm that occurs on that site, and there's a claim made against the village and against the applicant, that the applicant has to cover our bottom sides to the extent that any liability would be identified as being ours. And the applicant objects to that, and I agree with the applicant in this situation. I think that, and the applicant's attorney, I assume, pointed out that's asking for more than what the law would provide. The law would otherwise provide that we're responsible for our own liability to the extent that it's determined. So for that reason, they objected to it. I think that Act 67 made that clearly. So the part is stricken, even though it is part of prior CUPs, and I think indicates in part why you have to look at this, considering what the prior CUPs have said, but not to be led or misled by what prior CUPs might have said. The prior CUPs include the Cajun operation and the exterior, what was it, extreme exteriors. And I think that it would be fair to say that there were problems with both of those developments. And what I'm seeking to do is to try to give you the opportunity to well understand this one, to avoid what some might have thought to be errors in the past.
You said extreme exteriors, what was the other one?
Jason,
Okay. Yeah, those two, I think, became problematic. And it occurred, as little changes occurred along the line, the way in which the CUP was put together. And then some of them were post-approval operational features. But I think our goal is to let the planning commission members understand what they're getting out of this and then intelligently make a decision based on that understanding. So anyway, that paragraph is out. The next one deals with hours of operation, and they added language that's in blue at the bottom of that provision. And they say, I'll read it, well, you have already perhaps. Any business operating on premises shall have the right to be open to the public for business in whole or in part between the hours of Monday through Friday, 7 to 5, and Saturday, 7 to 2. And then the provision added that seems to potentially open up other uses almost any time, is that says the owner and occupant of the premises and their respective employees, contractors, guests, and invitees shall have the right to be at the premises 24 hours per day, 7 days a week, 365 days per year. To me, that additional language, I know, I think we're going to discuss it with Tim, but my concern was that the example they give is that the offices could be open, and then with Ben today, maybe there'll be a corporate meeting there on a Sunday, and it would seemingly be not permitted under the language, but for their additional sentence. But it seems to open up repairs, potentially, as I read it. And again, we're trying to avoid the ambiguity that becomes problematic in the future. So that's, I can tell you what our concerns are, and leave it to you and the applicant to decide.
I would agree it would open up the potential for repairs, but when you're in the business of repairing equipment and when stuff breaks down, you gotta get it fixed. You know, if you're working on the deep tunnel project and a piece of equipment breaks and you gotta get the job done, someone's gotta do it. And it's usually the guy that responds the quickest. I don't have a problem with the language. I mean, he's not proposing to run 24/7, 365, but if the opportunity arises, I don't see the need to decline it.
I agree, the location of the land isn't next to an adjacent
Right.
residential area where there's gonna be a noise, severe noise issue, so I don't see the change in the language being an issue.
Quick Trip's open 365, 24/7, is it not? Right across the street there, pretty much.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not the same type of business, not apples to apples, but
probably longer.
Vehicle traffic's higher.
no, I can see the concern, but
Do we have,
I agree with Warren. I mean, when you're dealing with unit down situations, it's, you know, to your benefit, it's time and materials at that point. You know, so.
do you have
I don't know.
language in there, something covering that if there's complaints or something like that, that this would be or something?
Wouldn't it be under wouldn't it just be under the general noise ordinance for the village?
Probably. Entering the neighbor within earshot.
That was just put to the test this last week, actually in the village for noise complaint. So, part of that is also, you know, attesting the fact we need to, as a village, be able to enforce whatever we put into the conditional use grant. You know, it's an absolute separate issue, but we have to do our due diligence as well. It's all things we have to work on in the future.
Do you have to write in there, subject to compliance to the village ordinances?
Maybe moving that more rapidly.
Mike,
I'm sorry.
Chris had a question.
Would you have to put in there subject to compliance with village ordinances?
No, I don't think you do that. You know, the village ordinances
It's
apply.
automatic?
And I don't know, saying something like, if complaints are received, because that sort of transfers the enforcement to someone who could have a complaint that's justified or not. So just a heads up on that one, I just put those things.
One thing I'd add, you know, when we're talking about that particular instance about repairs, it's rare that that would occur, but also that takes place inside the shop. It's not happening outside in the storage yard. So again, I mean, if the concerns about noise or things like that, it's contained within the building.
Do all repairs take place inside the shop?
Most of it depends on the size of the equipment. I mean, we're gonna try to build this in a way that we can accommodate the largest things we work on, but there are some things that it may require repair outside in the storage yard. When we look at like drilling equipment, foundation equipment, when we have to raise the mast on that, we can't, based on the village's height restrictions on the buildings, we can't build a building tall enough to be able to raise a mast inside. So we'd have to do something like that outside.
Would it help, be an honest characterization of the activities to say that repairs will generally occur in the building except when the size of the equipment prohibits that?
If you feel that's necessary, I mean, I think it's probably, you know, I think that it's gonna vary, I mean, by the type of equipment. So you know, again, I'd say, is there ever gonna be a situation where a smaller piece of equipment might have to have a quick repair done in the yard before it goes out? And then the service bays are full, so a mechanic goes out in the yard and changes filters or does some type of repair to it, that's a possibility. And I think, you know, looking at what we're trying to accomplish here, we want to be reasonable and we want to protect the interests of ourselves in the village, but that creates situations where then somebody could come along and say, well, you repaired that loader and that could fit in your shop. That's a violation of the conditional use permit.
Yeah. At the same time, the commission has to look at this from the perspective of something that's acknowledged and that you couldn't be there forever. And that 2 years or 33 years from now, somebody buys you out and they may not have the same concerns for the community that you might have.
Mhm.
And that's the balance we're trying to strike because this goes beyond just American state.
It runs with the land.
Yeah.
CUP runs with the land. And that can be problematic.
So, I guess two questions here. First of all, maybe as a point, you look down into 9B Bravo, basically says any substantiated material adverse impacts upon surrounding properties resulting from a lot of things in here, but noise is there, parking, traffic, lighting, glare. You know, it covers the majority of that. As we're debating this, I would also ask, we have a conditional use grant, but there's also at some point going to be a business plan, right? Plan of operations? Would that not be a detail that would be addressed more so under the business operation?
My thought is yes, that there would be. This one's sort of on an expedited path where you would have seen that as part of the CUP. You would have seen other things that would be part of the CUP application. In this situation, what we've done, I think, in an effort to try, before I got involved in it, was to try to accommodate the applicant to move this along. So the answer, I believe, is yes, because it's required by code. However, the CUP does lay out some characteristics, a number of characteristics that would be in the plan of operation. So we want to tie down some things at this point because the CUP is going to carry with it a whole bunch of rights. So I'd answer your question. I think the answer is that there will be a plan of operation except to the extent that operational characteristics are already incorporated into the CUP. And a lot of them are, I think. I think the major ones are already topics in the CUP.
And I'll just add on to that we have received from the applicant an initial submittal, you know, the plan that you have in your packet. It technically functions as a conditional use site plan for the purposes of applying for it. He's acknowledging, the applicant is, and we understand that through condition 9A on the renumbered, you know, CUP or CUG that we have in front of us, that we are expecting that to come back again, that is a standard requirement. So in other words, he gave us something that was, it passes the test for one, but we've made notes based off that to say, well, you still need this detail, and we've tried to incorporate it into the notes. And basically, I think you understand, everybody does, that what Mike's saying is typically you receive that all on the front end, but for us to accommodate the desired timeline, we're saying, we understand that'll come later, and we're gonna do it this way, and then that'll come back. So you got it with your statement, correct? Does that help clarify further your statement and reinforce what you just said, based on what I'm telling you, or?
Yeah.
Okay,
We're both saying the same thing. I think.
yeah, okay.
So, to go back to where we're at, I think on 8A, about the hours of operation, the commission is satisfied that the language that the applicants provided is acceptable.
Yes.
Yes.
And then B, right below it, it addresses substantiated, which are identified material adverse impacts of the operation. And then one of the standards is, besides those that are mentioned in the black typing, issues that they're able to operate in ways, or they're prohibited from operating in ways not commonly associated with the operation of equipment, sales, and rental establishment. I have trouble with that because I don't know how you prove that. So if they're doing something that's offensive, it's a substantiated material adverse impact, they can do it as long as others in the same type of business do it. I would just tell you from an enforcement perspective, that's pretty tough. It requires them proving that others don't do it. So you decide what you want to do with it, but I'll just tell you from an enforcement perspective, that one's very tough. So in other words, there's a complaint, and they say we operate, and all of the businesses like this do it this way. And we get to do it this way. So that's up in court, and then I guess and I don't mean to pick on him, but just whoever it is, them or someone else down the line, a subsequent owner, just says everybody does it this way, it's in this business. How do you prove that, or disprove it? I mean, the code requirements are the code requirements. Noise and dust and all the rest of those things. I don't know any other one where it compares it to another business and says you get to do what this other business does.
Now, the rezoning of the property, wouldn't that define this too? The permitted uses?
It introduces the permitted uses, however, measuring commonly associated with the operation of an equipment sales rental establishment, those noises, lights, commonly associated with them, what are those? They're not real measurable, so that's what he's saying. Does that make sense? So it is
I understand
introduced,
that,
but
but
yeah.
And does the zoning already define that for us?
It does address noise, light, glare. Basically, if somebody complains about it and it's not customary, either at that time of day or at that level, that's where you can step in. However, if it's, somebody complaining about it's too loud, or based on what, at the time of day, or there again is a measurable issue. But it does address it, and so that's why he was bringing this up. So if we can enforce it, it's challenging.
I think that what's been saying is yes to our standards. And if there's a complaint and it's substantiated, so in other words, this is a violation of the village standard, they can still do it if other operations like this do it.
Would that be better to remove than not in the commonly used, and just say commonly used, or commonly associated with the operation?
Well, you still have to prove whatever words. You have to prove, take those words and prove it. So commonly is one standard, but the associated with is another one. And I don't know how you prove what other companies like this do.
Yeah.
So just by way of example, as we were discussing this internally and making this proposition on this language, one of the things, the reasoning behind this is when you talk about our type of operations, so, and back to maybe the issue of noise that we're talking about. If we're backing a machine into a parking spot and the backup alarm is going on, that's something that's commonly associated with our type of business. But is that, if somebody complains about a backup alarm, is that, you know, how do you address that? I guess, so that's why that was kind of by way of example, one of the basis for us including language like that. There are things that would be commonly associated with our business. Somebody walking their dog by may find it offensive to hear a backup alarm and make a complaint
But
about
the
it.
backup alarms, Tim, are required by law. They're required by law, as far as I know. So this wouldn't apply to this situation. It's just not on point for this immediate discussion. But I think that the commission has to understand that, at least from this perspective, that is very difficult to enforce. I put it near the impossible category. So if you want to leave it in there, that's up to you. Your consultants can tell you what they think is right from their perspective, and then ultimately the decision is up to you.
Would there be a drastic difference in just striking that, what would be the blue sentence on here, on an enforcement standpoint? Because the argument could be if you were following up on a noise complaint or an order complaint, you know, they could make the same argument saying, if that's not defined in here, or either way.
I don't think it needs to be in there at all either, because right after the parentheses start including, though not necessarily limited to. I mean, doesn't that cover a lot of miscellaneous things that aren't listed? It still gives him free rein to do what they need to do to stay open and work.
So again, this is pretty vanilla language without their addition.
Right, correct.
You know what I mean? It's customary to have it in there as it was.
I guess I'd look at it, is there an objection to striking that blue sentence and just leaving the language as the black and white?
No, I think, I mean, if that's, in this, hopes of keeping things moving along, I think we would be okay with that, I believe.
I
Just
view
based
it
on
as
the
if there is
use.
a complaint, you know, if you could justify it, if you have that language in there or not, you know, that complaint comes back to the village board, they're gonna say, okay, we understand, you have backup alarms that are covered by law, or there's another noise that your operations makes that somebody complained about, that's just, you know, part of that, you know, customary use.
We, at our current site on Highway 100 right now, we have dense residential across Beecher Street from us and across Highway 100 from us. We haven't received any complaints ever from any of those neighbors. So I'm okay with striking that because I think it's probably not in a situation that's gonna come up. And again, the only reason we put that language in was for trying to account for instances like, okay, a backup, you know, things that are common to our type of business that maybe people in the village aren't familiar with. And so we were trying to address that, but I can see the village's perspective on that as well, and we'd be fine with striking that.
Yeah, the backup alarm thing, people gotta stop ordering from Amazon
Right.
too. UPS, Amazon, they're all there, so I don't see that ever being a noise complaint.
Okay, is everybody okay with striking it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just strike it.
And then I think we can go on to the next page as far as I'm concerned, unless somebody else thinks that there's more topic. So, on the next page, that's numbered, right, this is the third page, it starts with number 9 on top, conditions on the site. And I think again, Ben was relying on earlier drafts to put this together. So a lot of what you see here comes from the work of others. I think it's generally fine, bearing in mind that we've had some problems with the CUPs we had in the past. But I kind of, I don't have any problems with, I think, any of this as we go up through the first half of that page. These things are all, the things that you see on this list of A, the site plans, B, exterior lighting, C, building elevations, D, site landscaping, paving and parking, plans. I think for other applicants, that's been a requirement that it be included with the CUP at this time, so you have more detail. But I think there's been an effort here to expedite this one. It seems to have been identified as a good project. So these things have not been required, but in the CUP, it's set up in a fashion that would require them to be provided before they have performed, fully performed. So these things have to be performed, taken care of before there's shovels put in the ground. Stop me if anybody wants. And then as we go on to H, in the middle of the page, starting with outside storage, let me take the bite on the last one, this last sentence. Storage shall not exceed, it's 45% of the total area of the premises. Ben and I talked about that today, and I don't know that we really had a conclusion on that one. Maybe you can help me, because you got to go section I didn't, Ben, but.
Yeah, so 16.23 of our code, I think it's subsection I, talks about modifications can be accommodated based on a previous approved site plan approval, and therefore the modifications, the language was pretty open. Plan Commission has some allowances there to say modifications or exceptions to elements of a site plan that are required, and one of them is the 20% area. So the applicant is coming in and proposing a 45% of the total lot as outside storage, which exceeds our 20% mandate. So the question that the attorney and I still haven't really concluded is, does that provision in that code actually permit for this? Or do they have to go to Board of Appeals or actually have the more land with that second lot in their possession to get that 45%, 20 and 20? They might have to throttle it back a little bit too, but we haven't quite decided that yet.
So bottom line from a legal perspective is we haven't been able to come to a conclusion. This has all come up pretty recently. Factually, though, I don't know if you're prepared to discuss whether that makes sense to you if there's the legal ability to do it. So the storage area that Tim has described and its uses would then be, if legally could be done, would be increased from the 20% contemplated by the code to 45%. And I don't know if you have a reaction to that. If you do, I think it would help the applicant and the staff to know what that is.
I would assume that that's fairly common for equipment sales and rental establishments.
Yeah. One of the things that if you take this in a broader context and the way we looked at this for both H and I, is, if I remember correctly, so the ordinance is 20% for outside storage, screened outside storage, 30% for display area. So our business, we're not like a car dealer where we want to park all of our new whole goods inventory out front and have people come walk around the lot and look at that equipment. Quite frankly, we prefer to have most of it within the screened storage area. So what we look at is if you have 20% for outside storage, 30% for display area, what we would propose is just transferring that density from the outside display area over to the storage area. So really, it puts more of the equipment back in the screened area, and then we'd only be asking for 5% rather than 30% for the outside display areas that are unscreened. There we just want to park 3 or 4 machines that as customers pull in or people drive by, they can see them there. Otherwise, quite frankly, we want to have our equipment secured behind the fence, and it's out of sight that way as well. So that when we propose that, it's not just H or I, it's in the context of both of them together.
So The conclusion is, and what we're doing too in a sense would be setting some sort of precedent that we're not enforcing this code requirement in subsequent applications. So if the conclusion is that we don't have the flexibility to grant it, would the commission want to recommend to the board to change that standard in the ordinance from 20% to 45%? That would be one way to get it done, if you want to do that. And if it turns out that the section that Ben may be aware of this afternoon about 3 o'clock, I'll have to look at it, but as I read it and understood it, it applied to situations where the permit's already granted, and then there's an opportunity to have a modification and seem to give some leeway there. But even if in that situation, it may still not be permissible to vary that 20% requirement. And I would assume you want to vary, I would assume you want to uniformly apply these standards. And to the extent that you don't have the authority to modify it, you just don't do it. So, that's as much as
I think there's varying circumstances though. I mean, we wouldn't want to grant 45% outdoor storage to a refuse company. But a heavy equipment dealership that's gonna have some shiny new pieces of equipment and some used ones and some rentals is a different proposition. I don't think I would be willing to look at changing the ordinance to allow carte blanche anybody to store 45% out, but on a conditional use grant, that's a one-off that you're evaluating the specific situation.
no, but everybody's subject to the code. We don't make a decision
Right.
based on what their business is. We have to uniformly apply that to everybody.
And can I suggest something maybe? Like, think of it maybe in terms of saying, when there's a request for an outside storage area in addition to display area, what I'm hearing you kind of say too is, in this situation where they have both afforded to them, they're saying the 50% that they're normally allowed total, there's transferring it from one to the other, and it's being evaluated based on the circumstances. If both of those are generally applied at the same time and considered, then you're allowing for transferring some of that from one to the other based on the request. Is that what I hear you say, basically?
Yeah,
Is that kind of,
exactly.
that's my way of thinking about it in terms of like following the code and
Right.
trying to put some measurables on it.
Is it my understanding, I mean, the larger equipment, my construction background is you're not parking those in a used car dealer stacks cars anyway.
No.
That it's the area needed to maneuver that equipment and get it in and out, more or less, than having a stockpile of equipment that's not gonna be. You can't easily do that in a smaller area.
So, I guess maybe I'm missing it here, and if I did, I apologize, but H&I together talks about outside storage and outside display areas, so both of them are addressed. One was from the village to the applicant, 20% for storage and 30% for display. And then they're just simply asking to rearrange those percentage points to 45% and 5% respectively, still coming to a total of 50%. So I guess I got a double question. First of all, why would we not have the authority to go ahead and change that, because it equivalates out to the same amount of outside things, outside space being used? And I'll also ask the applicant, why make the difference between storage and display? I guess maybe, I don't understand, because it's basically the same thing. You would store your display equipment outside, you would display your storage equipment outside. To me, semantically, it's one and the same.
I think the applicant's looking at it as storage is behind the
Storage is
security gate.
within the screened area, yeah. And so we really only display maybe 4 machines or 5 machines.
I got you.
And then everything else we like to have secured. Where we are currently, vandalism is a concern, so we like to have our inventory secured behind the fence. I'm not saying that's a problem here, but we like to have our.
Machinery isn't cheap.
Then that does make sense. So
Yeah, so
display would be outside of the normal storage area that would be, okay.
Is
It's
this
a
the
difference.
semantics here? Could it just be, I mean, can you have a display area behind the fence? There's nothing, I don't think that says you can't have a display area behind the fence. So defining your storage area, well, this portion is my storage, and this portion is my screen display, and then I got another 5% display here. I don't think that's
And I was just
any
gonna
different
say
than
that,
what we're just talking
yeah.
about.
So in,
That's what
it's
it's
a
a semantic
so in
issue.
the outside storage area, some of that,
Your
some
other
of
new
that
equipment
volume
would
could
be
be
on,
part of the.
yeah, your other new
display
equipment would be
area.
on display, where it would be in storage. I think that's semantics at
Yeah,
that point.
Well,
I think it's
it's
just
not-
a dotted line on the plan.
It's not semantics in terms of the language here, because H specifically says it's behind a fence, behind 6-foot tall evergreens planted for visual barrier. That's the difference.
I think
It calls it
it's,
out here specifically, in
it's
this
to-
case.
to our advantage too, that they have 5%, you know, the 3/4 piece of equipment out visible to ours and their advantage, and then to have the rest of the storage behind the fence where you really don't see it. And then for security for you.
Yeah.
So I can see a good case here for both of us.
I like the language the way it's written. I don't know.
And
what we have to do.
we'll have to have Mike check everything and make sure it's all good, you know?
I mean, it protects us more with the screening, it protects him more with stuff being locked down. You know, I think it's win-win.
I see this as what
If you're looking at future uses,
display.
we're still locking down behind screening any storage. But you just cut down their visible display area down to 5% from 30 on that property.
First time somebody goes out there with a wheel and starts measuring that stuff and starts doing the math on how much it is, I'm going to challenge and say there's 200 other businesses in town that need to get lined up before his.
That's where they can come back and ask for a modification. If they challenge it.
Tom, did you have a question?
I just wondering, the display units that you put out there, do you guys bring them back inside the fenced area at night, or do you traditionally leave them out there
They
for
stay out
a couple weeks at a time?
24 hours a day, and we just rotate depending on, you know, one day it might be an asphalt paver, the next day a wheel loader.
Sure.
Or 1 week, you know, a paver, a wheel loader, but they stay out in that display
Okay.
area 24/7.
All right.
Okay, so the opinion of the commission isn't to leave the language in. Do we have a yes?
Yes,
Okay.
leave language.
Anybody object there? Okay, let's move further.
I won't do any research on it, I guess is what I'm directing here. Leave it, they're recommending.
I personally don't see a need to do the research, because if it's a semantic issue and the ordinance says that, no, we can't make that change, it's a matter of him labeling his plan of operations that, well, this 5% area is my display, this 15% behind the fence is display, and then this other 30% behind this fence is my storage. I don't see that being, you know, he doesn't have to have all his display area in the same spot.
We have to have Mike check.
Yeah, but I think
Sure.
that what they're saying is, you gotta think about all the other businesses and the precedents it sets. That, the way I'm understanding it is, maybe in a perfect world, you would have an ordinance that would say, any applicants allowed up to 50% storage, that could be subdivided percentage-wise, fence, non-fence, in compliance with the planning commission and voted on by the you know what I mean? Am I understanding it correctly? Like,
I think as staff, we would prefer that methodology a little clearer with language than that's
Right.
currently written. But they've proposed this, and like we said, we discussed it, we weren't real clear on it either.
Yeah.
It would benefit everybody if it was made more clear, in my opinion. I don't know what your opinion is.
Well, I mean, I don't know the answer at this point.
I think and again, I don't want to roll cold water on it, I'm just saying, like, if the current ordinance is 20%, right? And you have, maybe you have a couple different businesses in the village that they don't have any intention of storing things outside for viewing, right? They don't have any, I don't know what's it called here, it escapes me here, but the the new equipment you would park out front for viewing, maybe that business doesn't have anything, and then they come back and they say, wait a minute now, you gave them 45%, and now it's only 20, and now I wanna fill my whole yard up with equipment, or you know what I mean? And then how do you say no? You know what I mean? How do you say no to them once you allow it with one other individual? And that's why you have to be careful. I think that's what their concern is. I'm okay with it the way it's written, you just gotta make sure
So the
that,
way I understand conditional use grants is exactly that, it's conditional for that property and that property alone. Everything else goes back to zero, square one, and it builds up from there. Now, they could say, hey, you let them do it over here, but we could say the circumstances are different. You're bordering residential, for instance. So
Correct.
you have, a different situation at hand. It doesn't mean that just because we gave it to one, we have to give it to the next.
No, I disagree with Tony. What you said is perfectly correct for a PUD, plan unit development, but this is not that. This is a conditional use grant, and you don't have the authority to change the law to a conditional use grant. It still has to be consistent with the law.
Okay? So
So,
what part of that is not conditioned, that is not conducive with the law?
the law has a 20% standard. And you might want to define the words differently to get a conclusion, but it's, the storage area is a 20% standard. And I think that it does have some sort of definition, the storage area. So, all I'm saying is, if you don't direct me to do any research on it, determine I think you have the authority to grant this change with knowing what Tom just described as being the consequence of it. I won't do it. I won't do the research. And I just want to clear that I was instructed not to. If it's your desire that I do the research and come to a conclusion, I'll do it.
I have a suggestion, I'm just stepping out of my lane, but if you said in H, the said storage area shall not exceed 20%, you left that at 20%, that'd be consistent with the code.
Correct.
And then I, you could say the display area, and somehow word in that the display area could be behind the fence.
Correct, that's exactly what I thought.
So you don't change the meaning of the code, but you're specifying for this property, you understand the display is behind the fence. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, so you're not saying, they're having a larger fenced-in area is all it is.
Yeah, they're having more screened storage area, even though they, on the print, their 30% storage area is this, up to this line on the concrete. Their 15% of the storage area they're gonna call screen display, and then they have their 5% display out front. I don't think that does any violation of the ordinance, they just have screen display area.
Yeah,
And just identify that within the site plan.
Correct.
As,
Yeah.
as this is displayed, even though it's behind the fence.
Right. You have storage behind the screen, you have display behind the screen, up to the 45% of the total. And then the 5% unscreened display. It does, we don't have to worry about the ordinance at all.
That might be a better workaround
I-
in this situation to achieve kind of what I'm hearing, it's my opinion. From enforcing that would be easier, especially if they call it out in the site plan clearly. This is outside display area, even though it's behind the fence.
Correct.
yeah.
You enter through the building and exit the building and you're in the yard, but you're in the outside display area.
I think that's a reasonable compromise.
Is there a site plan that's been submitted yet?
Not the final, no.
Okay.
And they can be held to this standard though when they do submit it before we approve their building permit.
Yeah, so you,
So we'll call that out within the
this issue
site
will come
plan.
up again on the site plan and apparently be dealt with at that point, consistent with what I sense to be the consensus here. So it still might be a precedent-setting thing as to how you do this, but at least it, I think, minimizes that comparison.
So what I'm
I
hearing
guess my
is,
suggestion to the language is change the 45% to 20%. Change the 5% back to 30%. And at the end of that sentence, total area of the premise, you could put screened or unscreened for the display area.
maybe we could say, 25% shall be behind the fence and then the remaining 5% shall be outside the fence,
Sure.
Okay.
outside the display area. Does that not make sense, Mr.
25% screen.
Or screen, yes, sorry. Is that under I for outside
It
display?
accomplishes the same
I
thing.
understand what you're doing, where the math is going. Is that an ordinance already that we have that's 30% display area?
Up to. Shall not exceed. But it doesn't mention it has to be outside of a fence, it just talks about,
It's just display area.
right,
I wouldn't spell anything out, I would leave it totally innocuous, and
That's a good point.
the applicant can decide whether he wants it screened or not.
oh, I see what you're saying.
And just,
You know,
and just identify it on the site plan.
Right.
So you're
Just
told
say
area
this area, my
60%.
lot is display area,
So keep it at 20 and 30.
yeah.
And don't change any language in that.
Right, and we'll identify the areas on the site plan as far as.
That's the easiest way to do it, but we're
Outside
not
display
getting
and inside
in
display.
any
Yeah,
trouble.
there's no argument, there's no argument on definition, it's just a matter of,
Right,
they split their display area, here's 5%, here's 25%, it's still
Right.
30% total.
yep,
And as staff, like, if somebody follows me in my footsteps, they can at least argue 20, 30 is called out the site plan as such, then it's easier to interpret and everybody follows it. Like, to his point too, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years,
yep.
somebody else is gonna be sitting in the seat, so.
And you
good
get
luck.
5%.
Okay, we're good with that.
So just for future clarification, so I got it, the 20% storage and the 30% display is not flexible. We cannot, through a conditional use permit, conditional use grant, be able to say 30% for storage area, for instance.
If I say that we can't, that we have to act in all ways consistently with the existing code requirements and CUP, does that answer the question, Tony?
It does. I guess I'm just
What's the
confused
water
what we
permit?
have flexibility on to look at, because like the roof of the apex of the roof of a building, we can say it can be deviated by a certain amount, or the lot line setbacks can be deviated by a certain amount. So I just naturally assume that storage areas and display areas were also flexible in conditional use permits for that property, or permits.
I'll say no.
Okay.
Follow the code. And the description that's gone here seems to be consistent with some reasonable reading and understanding of the phrases that are involved.
It's nothing, we've already decided this, I was just looking at it for future because, I guess, thought all things
So-
on the table. for-
No, this is really important in that sense, because this is, I mean, that intersection up there is a pretty valuable thing for the village, and it offers a great deal of potential opportunity. And I keep likening it to 83 and I-43 and Mormon Road and I-43, the latter of which I think Mary was probably pretty involved in, and I was deeply involved in that whole development of that intersection. And what you want to see in that intersection, and what you do now that sets the stage for what's going to occur there, and for uses that would be compatible with what we're now approving. So this is, to me, this is a very big deal. It's the first really significant development on that intersection that sets the stage for what follows. So that may be part of why you fault me for wanting to go into detail. I'm not asking for anybody to agree or disagree with that, but I just see this as being a very big issue for the village. Just so you know where I'm coming from. So if that, does that cover that page? Because I don't have anything else on it.
We have the language right as far as where you want to go now, when we present this to the board.
Keep it at 20 and 30.
Yeah.
They could just spell it out on their.
Right, plan operations. take care
Okay,
of it.
let's go ahead and move forward then.
Yeah, and you know, since this is sort of an open issue, I know you kind of been to undertake the effort. As that gets drafted, could it get directed to all the plan commission members? Take a look at it, and if there's any great objection, to let staff know? Because then I understood and I may not have grasped all of the wording that was suggested, that provides this qualification to the standard, but there's some additional wording. Is that what you understood, Ben? Or is it just the wording that's here?
Sorry, you lost me.
Well, there was a discussion here about modifying the percentage, or taking it, I guess, back to where it was. And then there was some language that was suggested, I didn't understand, I guess, but.
No, I suggested making a language change to say that the display area was screened or unscreened, and Warren made the point that that really doesn't matter, because they can just spell it out on their site plan, so we can just change the percent, as long as the total area doesn't exceed 30%, they get a 5% out front, 5% behind the, 25% behind the fence, as long as it's on their site plan defined that way, there's no need to add language.
Does the 20% on the face of it, Ben, and I didn't read specific language, and this came up, but is that consistent with the existing wording in our code?
The 20%, yes.
It is, and it's 45% consistent with the wording of our code.
The 45 came from what they currently are proposing, what they wanted. But 20% technically for the outside storage area is limited to 20. But they were showing 45, and then we just negotiated all that.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Is the 45% consistent with our code requirement?
Oh, the answer is no. It's not consistent.
Great.
The 30 gets.
Just, if that's on the record, which is fine, I just want that on the record, then if you wish, we'll go forward on that basis. The basis that's discussed and deal with the site plan. But the minutes have to reflect that that's not consistent with our code.
No, it is.
No.
It is.
Yeah,
The change to 20% and 30% is consistent.
He's asking for the specific language in the code. 20% for outside storage is what it is.
And that's where we're going back to.
Right.
Yeah, so it's consistent.
Okay. Okay, that's good.
Yep, that's it then, on that page. And then, the applicant can also, this is the top of the next page.
I'm sorry.
The top of the next page, right here, on N, on the bottom of the page that I have here, it talks about village engineer approval, and then it says, at the end of that first line, if the engineer shall determine based upon a site and plan review that a plan or specific conditions as to drainage will be required attendant to this project prior to start of any work toward new replacement construction on site, and it sounds like it's an incomplete sentence, but there's something more that, it doesn't make sense the way it's worded. So what happens is a whole bunch of dependent clauses in this thing, but it's not a big deal, I just didn't understand.
That's your language.
I know.
That wasn't ours.
So you have no understanding what it means?
I believe it understands that when it comes down to drainage patterns on the property, it's gonna be subject to review and approval of the engineer.
Well, then, maybe Ben and I don't know.
Well, let me ask the village engineer, based on this language, does this make sense, or would you prefer different language so that it achieves kind of what we're looking for here, as far as review and approval of site drainage plans?
I propose striking the attendant to this project on page 4, so that N would read, village engineer review and approval of the site drainage plans if the engineer shall determine based on a site and plan review that a plan or specific conditions as to drainage will be required. No, that doesn't.
And again, I looked at this from a previous CUG, it might have been oversight on my part too. But in the intention here is that the village engineer shall review and approve the site drainage plans.
Prior to taking over the site, you know, prior to any work starting.
So we just put something like that in there and that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be complicated.
I don't even know if we need it in there at all.
Yeah, because if I have to, it's code.
Let's take it out.
Okay.
It should make sense to take it out.
letter N.
And
Even if it's
the whole
code,
thing.
Yeah, because incomplete sentence,
even though it's code, we're taking it out.
it's gotta be met anyway.
It's
It has to
ordinance.
be met.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
It's not specific to the CUG.
So if we strike it, it's not gonna affect anything.
We'll still do engineer will review site drainage.
It's required for the building permit.
I see what you mean. I thought you meant it was code that had to be in the CUG.
Oh,
And then to continue on P, documents to be recorded as for deeds office, that's fine. I would like to add that the village would undertake that responsibility. So documents are recorded by the village with Washington County Register of Deeds. I just want to make sure we have the obligation.
I mean, I assume that was, yeah.
And then, it's minimal, but perhaps, but on Q, we include the property owner, and I just thought maybe it shouldn't be in there. That just, this is between the applicant and the village. And I haven't seen others where third parties were brought into it, even if they're the sellers. Is this just something?
Here, well, the situation in this case too, and I just thought of this though too, resulting lot number 1 will still remain with the current owner, right, in the end?
Correct. Yep.
Based on that information, so 3 lots are gonna be created out of this original parcel. One of the resulting lots would still be under the ownership of Vernon Associates Development. Does that change anything in your opinion, based on the drainage plan will be on their property too, will impact it, but-
Yeah, it's not a big deal, but, number one, add the village contacts, and there is a sub, lowercase 3. And then,
Who typically at the village would you recommend, the president or clerk?
I think that's up to the people who are gonna have that responsibility.
Well, we could make it the clerk, and then the clerk can disseminate it to myself or other staff. I mean, the clerk is always gonna be the clerk, whoever needs for that.
And that's fine. Clerk's going to do it. And then unless the planning commission feels otherwise. And then, I think we're getting to the end of it. On T, about those billboards, there's a proposal that we say that they're approved and these would be applied to the village of Big Bend's, kind of like this, but Fifth Bend's ordinances. I don't know who knows anything about those signs. I didn't even know there were signs there until I saw this. So I think it's difficult or impossible to make that, to no one give approval of something we don't know about and to be deeming it in compliance. I just don't think we can do that.
I mean, I don't know a lot about the signs myself, other than they've been there since like 1980 and on site. We'll have to obviously negotiate a new lease with.
Well, they have leases in place,
Leases in
you know,
place.
currently, so the billboard, it's leased to the billboard company. And so they've been running with the land, and they're also, you know, they're leased, so there are tenant rights on those. Now, those signs, those leases expire, which Tim was talking about the renewal, but that's out in the future.
So, I mean, I'm just saying from the village's perspective, we can't approve them through this process, number one, and number two, we can't deem them to be in compliance with any laws. We have no idea.
Why would we have no idea?
Wouldn't they
We
be-
should know what every sign in this village is and where it is, and have an approval on that, right?
We're assuming everybody has a building permit for every structure. That's not always the case though sometimes.
We know nothing about that. I mean, I don't know what you suggest.
So then, what, if we take this out, then that would just put the onus back onto the landowner to correct anything with those signs to make it in compliance with the village?
Well, just.
Even though that wouldn't that be the same thing as a superseding structure on a site that's non-compliant?
This is non-compliant.
Well, we don't know the history of it. I mean, we just say, wouldn't it be the same as some other situation where there's a non-compliant structure that might might have some legal non-conforming rights that we don't know. I mean, I don't think anybody here knows the history of those signs. And Tim knows it goes back to 1980, but what was the code back in 1980? Were they built consistent with the code in 1980 so that they're legal? We don't know, so we're just being asked to do something. And if you know about signs, fine, do this. Words that they be, the language be included, but I don't know anything about it. I don't know how we can say if something's approved that we don't know anything about.
Does this language even need to be on here if you have existing signs on the property that were installed or permitted under previous land owner? If this was an existing building, let's say a shed or something that was built to the 1970 code, and the 2023 code says something it's different, it's existing non-conforming, it doesn't really apply to the CUG in that point, doesn't it?
Well, this goes beyond, well, we just don't know enough to agree with this, and this is not the proper vehicle to make that determination. If you want to do the research on it to find out what that sign, the history of that sign, it could be done, but it's really going.
How do other communities do this? I mean, I would assume that the community itself would send out an inspector to find out what's going on with that sign. I guess I'm surprised if it was there in 1980 and we have zero clue that those signs have been there since then. Is that our fault as a village? I think the answer is yes.
Could be.
Could be.
Could be,
I
Tony,
mean, yeah.
but all of the facts that you stated as assumptions, we don't know that they're correct.
It's in the village of Big Bend.
Well, we may have records on it, we just don't.
Could you put wording in here that, you know, if deemed non-compliant, be brought into compliance or something? Or upon renewal of the lease, be brought into compliance with the current code, or to kind of have an end date of what we don't know, but then at a certain point we know what's, or
How about we as a village start doing our due diligence and get out there? If something would happen with that sign and it gets, if it blows over in the wind or it would collapse and there happened to be someone out there farming the stuff, I mean, would we not be liable for not inspecting that sign and making sure it's in compliance as a village?
There you're, it's okay to do stuff there. One is the legal right to have the sign, and the other is the integrity of the structure. Those are two different things. So I don't know
We've
if
got
I can
village
answer
code
your
on
question.
both.
My question is the sign ordinance, they only allow so many square feet of sign. Would the existing billboards count towards their existing sign allowed?
Billboards are considered off-premise, that they're advertising a place or business that's obviously off-premise. So they're their own animal. It's not covered by our current sign code for the business on the property. This language was just talking about any signage they put up, it's gotta meet, you know, village standards for the business itself. Billboards being pre-existing on a property, again, it's going back to, were they permitted, and if so, what were the standards at that time? We don't require inspections on billboards, believe it or not. We don't at the village, I know that for a fact. And it's one of those things, it's a private property matter. And I don't know, I'm not versed in laws as it pertains to billboards that are leased and subleased either. So I don't know what kind of maintenance standards they have. If it's derelict and it's falling down and it's looking awful or it's a danger to falling, we could probably step in as a village, maybe, from a structural standpoint.
My understanding of the building code at the state level, if something is existing, that if it was built to code at the time it was built, and it's still kept, maintained in that condition, it's fine. If something is deemed not adequate for at the time that it was constructed, the building inspector or the state building inspector can write an order to either make that correction, make it back to the code that it was built to, And we may not, and sometimes when you have to do a permit, you end up bringing up the current code.
Which the current code may or may not permit for it.
But at this point in this document, if the existing signs are there, and if they're not adequate, that can be something done through a big state building inspector point. And for us to have to worry about it in this, I don't think is an issue.
I mean, this is really not part of the current discussion, as I see it, because the signage that's allowed is what's allowed per village code. You stop the discussion there. When you get into existing signs that may or may not be legal, we don't know. We're not gonna deal with that at this point. That has to be dealt with elsewhere. Just to give you some information on something that answers the question, but goes beyond what's necessary to deal with this issue. I had one not too long ago where a large sign was inconsistent with the existing zoning code, because a lot of communities had reduced the height, maximum height in signs. They wanted to change the face. And the city said, no, that's a change. You can't change this legal, non-conforming structure. To which I said, hold on just a second now, there's rights for that structure to remain. And I did some research and convinced the city attorney in that community that if it's a structural problem, they can force the sign to be ripped down. But if it's merely a change in the face, those legal non-conforming rights trump. So the sign needs to be changed to the face of the sign. So that's the law on it. But that isn't the issue here tonight. The issue here tonight is the CUP and this paragraph of provision that requires signs prospectively to meet the code, which everybody agrees with, and other signs we don't know anything about have to be dealt with as separate issues.
So we should strike that.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is if we strike letter T, it doesn't change the requirement for the signs to be whatever ordinance or code, but we're not giving permission to say those signs are to code right now. Because we haven't inspected them, we don't know where they came from and how they were built.
You could strike T because they have to comply with the code, but you could also leave it in because I think at times it's a reminder for everyone that this was an issue of significance, and even though it may be covered elsewhere, but it was significant enough to merit a discussion before the commission.
So would you recommend removing the language about the 2 billboards existing?
Yeah,
Their
the blue
addition?
is what I'd say.
I think I
We don't-
I say strike the blue.
Yeah, strike it. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. All right.
Can we just live with that?
Yeah, because, this was, when you go back to the original draft CUG, this was never addressed in there. And the issue of the billboards was brought up by Will Hine, I believe. And so for us, I'm fine if you want to strike where it starts with the 2 billboards existing on the premises, if you want to strike that.
Because we're not saying they were permitted and approved, we don't know that without investigating that.
We only included that language because it was brought to our attention about the signs.
So Will Hines, which is the
You need to
village
check with Vernon.
employee, what was his concern with it?
He just mentioned that it should be addressed. He didn't raise any concerns or anything. It was just somewhere in one of the email chains, and I don't remember exactly what his wording was.
He just noted that it was there and he wanted to be addressed and he included it.
So the language came from that and us trying to address it.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I think we're good there.
Yep.
Okay,
I think that's it from my perspective.
so that pretty much covers.
So we need a motion to recommend approve, or,
Everything.
to recommend this to the village board for approval with the amended changes.
Could make that motion.
I will.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not gonna be in a formal typed up version at this point.
Right.
That has to be done, and I think we're gonna submit it to the applicant and make sure that they agree with what they said,
I will make that motion though to recommend to the village board to approve this conditional use grant with the amended changes from tonight.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It passes. So we know. Is that Tony or Chris?
Chris.
So now, next, back to item B.
Okay, we'll go back to item B.
So item B again is the review, discussion, possible action on the request of the applicant, American State Equipment, for the rezoning request from B3 to B4 to the Highway Business Flex District in the currently vacant land that we've been discussing. We just talked about the conditional use grant, which everybody was talking, and we hammered that out. So that's the companion to this rezoning. So without the rezoning request going through, the conditional use grant would basically be pointless. So it wouldn't hold any weight with that regard. So with that being said, it does allow for B4 zoning with this conditional use grant that would run with the land, just so everybody knows, as long as those conditions are adhered to. So is there any questions of staff on my report that was presented at the last plan commission meeting that you should have before you? I believe you have the exhibit, the legal description. It was duly noticed. We accepted public hearing at the last meeting, which I understand there was nobody there to discuss from the public anyway in this regards. That's the way I saw it. Unless village president received anything in writing or anything.
Dan, has there been any additions, subtractions, or any additional comments, anything since the last
No.
revision?
Nope, you still have the original staff report as such because there was no recommended follow-up from staff on the rezoning.
And we're only doing lot 3.
Just the lot 3 of the proposed CSM, but the lot 3 is legally described, the rezoning is legally described to mirror the proposed lot 3.
Is there a motion to rezone?
I'll make the motion.
Not yet, I just, hang on. I want to give Mike's comment on any of this before we move forward.
Okay, the one thing I think that the applicant could hopefully do for us would be to describe the timing that they are requesting, so everybody on the plan commission understands what the timing is between these actions that the board, the commission is taking and the board, and what's going to happen relative to the time into their transaction.
So our closing date would be, I think, is it December, it's early, mid-December.
It's mid, I think December 14th.
Yeah. So at the time of closing, as long as we can make it through all of the rest of our due diligence, with everything that we can get driveway approved, all of those different things, and we move forward with the closing, then at that point in time, that's when we want to record the conditional use, the rezoning, everything else, or no later than, and the CSM, or no later than December 31st. Otherwise, it would all become null and void.
Once as the applicant sees it, and then perhaps on this, but when does the rezoning become effective?
Upon publication of the,
Well, no, I got that, but when is it relative? Can the rezoning become effective and then the transaction falls apart? And all of this is, nothing happens. I mean, could we rezone it and be stuck with the rezoning even if this doesn't go forward?
When the CSM get filed.
I think our thought on that all along was that the rezone would go into effect at the same time that the conditional use permit would be recorded. So that way, what we were trying to avoid is that a situation just like what you're talking about, Mike. So if something were to come along and prohibit this deal from going through, then the CUP becomes null and void, it doesn't get recorded, the zoning doesn't take place, and the land stays exactly as it is. And you don't have to go back and try to unwind it. I mean, I think that, from our perspective, we thought that was in the best interest of the village, so that you wouldn't have an issue where it's rezoned, it doesn't go through, the conditional use permit doesn't get recorded, but you still have the zoning issue. So if the zoning ran concurrent with the recording, if the zoning is approved but runs concurrent with the recording of the CUP, then if the sale goes through, everything's fine. If the sale doesn't go through, you don't have to worry about trying to unwind that zoning.
I'd ask Paul.
I'm not, I'm Chad, so I'm not, I'm the real estate broker. So I'm farthest thing from an attorney that you can get right now.
It looked like.
Although I like to play one on TV.
I think that if we kind of discussed this last time a little bit, and I just want to make sure that I got it right to kind of say what I believe that you had told us last time. If the deal does not close, then the property is, the CSM does not come into effect, and we're only rezoning one of the 3 lots that would be concurred from the CSM going into effect. We're not rezoning all 3 of those. So the rezoning that we're discussing right now would be null and void if the closing does not happen, because right now that property does not exist in its entity that we're putting the rezoning onto. Does that make sense, Tim? Is that kind of
It does, but I
something
think
you
we
said?
talked about that you can still rezone based on the legal description, not necessarily the recording of the
So,
CSM.
so technically, that's not true. You can, a rezoning would go through and be effective if the CSM is approved. That won't get approved until it's recorded. Same with the conditional use grant, but the rezoning would be effective. If the owners of the land were to, the applicant and the owner would part ways for whatever reason, it wouldn't go through, it'd be on the owners to come back and have to rezone it back. Does that make sense? Because it's actually technically
But you're only rezoning a portion of the
correct.
entire property.
You can do that.
You can do, okay, all right.
You don't want to usually, but you can do it. It makes it confusing.
The last time we talked about that property, I think give an example, the shooter shop in Cleveland, in West Dallas. Half of the house is zoned residential, the other half's business. It can be done. And here it's a vacant land parcel, and it's not really terribly unusual that you might have a larger parcel, and it's own egg, and you only have a 2-acre lot for a house. And they rezoned that parcel, even without legal description. Well, you need legal description to rezone it, but you can do that. So it can be done. It can be done.
So I guess with that being said, is there a concern of the commission to be able to rezone something without having everything generally recorded? But the other thought that I had too is maybe you could condition the next item up, which would be the CSM, that you can't condition a rezoning. But what you could do is maybe add a condition on approval of CSM that should the CSM be recorded, this would be back to the applicant and owner to decide and discuss, but then we could say, he can't force an owner to come back and rezone it, but you could suggest with language maybe that would be the action, the recommended action.
And Ben just said a phrase that I wanted to say.
That's my job, you're the attorney.
Contract law, you can't attach
Condition.
conditions to a rezoning. But if we, be constructive and try to get where it seems like everybody wants to get here, rather than, I guess, we're not gonna call it a condition, but we're going to say that the recommendation to the board is that none of the actions taken, assuming they're all taken for approval, become effective until such time as the rezoning become effective, until such time as the applicant indicates that they're ready to proceed, and no later than to December 31st, which the applicant has indicated has to be occur. So we're not conditioning anything on anything, including rezoning. We're saying that they just don't become effective until that date. I think that's.
That's perfect. It gives him the assurance that, the village is, going to rezone the property on Amherst.
Yeah, so they don't become, they're not gonna be executed and effective until such time as the applicant advises that they are ready to proceed.
So does somebody want to add that as a motion
I
of
will make that
recommendation?
motion.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Any more discussion?
And make it clear that it's not conditional zoning, it's a delay in the
That's a
effective
great.
date.
Effective date of December 31st.
Authorization.
No later.
No later than Okay, read that totally backwards, please, so everybody's very clear.
So, yeah, it's clear.
The recommendation is none of the actions taken be effective until such time as the applicant indicates they are ready to proceed.
No later than.
No later than,
December 31st.
later than December 31st.
Yeah.
You got it?
Okay.
You have it. Okay.
And now, just throwing if somehow something gets delayed, we can then just recommend that they be changed.
If you need to grant an extension,
Right.
if you felt it was justified at that point, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it
Just
would
wanted to
be-
clarify
it would
that.
come
All of a
here.
sudden, we weren't stuck on that date and something gets delayed, and all of a sudden, we're back in it. Redoing it down the road.
Okay, we're good? Okay, all in favor?
Alright.
And it passes.
Right, thanks for that clarification, by the way.
And all sorts of interesting things.
You will have C, D, E.
We need to do D. The CSM. Certified survey.
Oh, okay, go ahead, then.
So, I'll introduce it.
Oh. The, item D,
So item D is going to be the review, discussion, and possible action on request by the applicant for the actual certified survey map to create the 3 previously mentioned parcels of land. The resulting lots would be 19.06 acres on lot 1, 16.46 acres on lot 2, 16.46 acres on lot 3, which is where the conditional use grant and rezoning was discussed tonight. The properties are front on the County Highway ES, and the driveway access considerations would be determined by Waukesha County and would be determined when a final site plan is proposed. And I know the engineer has done a report on their request that is presented to you, and as such, is there any questions of staff on this or concerns?
Naomi, has there been any additions, subtractions, or further comments made since the last meeting?
No, same exact handout.
And I will add that the legal description probably would be changed for the resulting lot 3 from the, what was it, the Viking spelling of north to
Yeah.
the misspelling. Sorry, had at it.
Just trying to liven it up a little bit.
Yeah, the motion is second.
German, I'll make a motion to
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, do we need to put the same,
I would, yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve post CSM change contingent on the applicants going forward.
You understand?
Yeah.
So I believe the previous motion was none of the actions taken on the CSM will be effective until such time that the applicant is ready to proceed and no later than December 31. Is that the?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other discussion at all? Or- Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving forward, we're gonna have no action on the planner, the fire inspector, building inspector, engineer, correspondence, so we will look for an adjournment.
Motion adjourned.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. You guys.
And then